Lesley Weidenbener, managing editor of the Indianapolis Business Journal. We're 2 weeks away from Election Day, and we have Kyle Hupfer, the chairman of the Indiana Republican Party, to chat about all things Indiana campaigns. Thanks for giving us some time, Kyle.
Thank you, Lesley. Appreciate it.
So you are also the campaign manager for Governor Eric Holcomb.
I am.
What does he need to do in these next 2 weeks to make his case to Hoosiers?
Well, he's been making the case for 4 years, Lesley, and so I think Hoosiers know who he is. You know, we've run a very positive campaign highlighting the successes of Indiana, not just over the past 4 years, but under Republican leadership over the past 16 years. And I think you'll just continue to see us do that down the home stretch. Obviously, he's got 2 opportunities left. He's had a few already to speak to the public directly through forums and debates, one this evening and then another one in a week. And I think you'll, again, continue to hear him speak about the positive messages of Indiana, job creation and workforce development that he's just knocked out of the park under his administration.
What are you hoping that the governor accomplishes in tonight's debate?
I mean, I hate to be repetitive, but I think you're going to see him spread the good news of Indiana. I mean, Hoosiers know what has happened over the last 4 years. They know the areas of focus for the governor. And now the world's starting to see it, by the way. We've just in the last few weeks seen some huge milestones and successes. One on foster parenting, where Indiana got a $5 million award as being the best state in the country for adoptions out of foster care. And the second was an all-time record, since we've been keeping statistics back to the 1900s, early 1900s, on infant mortality. 2 things that he's focused on, talked about in State of the Union. So it's not just rhetoric at these speeches, he's putting metrics with it and delivering. And so I think you'll hear him, talk about the positives of his administration.
In a year that really was supposed to be, or that many think will be good for Democrats, the governor's opponent, Woody Myers, just has not mounted to the challenge that many thought he would. Have you been surprised? And the fact that Myers isn't on TV and has been fairly low profile, has that changed your strategy or the governor's strategy at all?
I don't think anything that our opponents have done has really changed our strategy. COVID certainly impacted the strategy, just certainly time-wise, the campaign got started later than probably what we would have done normally. But no, I mean, I think that, the reality was going into COVID as Hoosiers were looking around, deciding what they were going to do. And folks on the other side of the aisle were thinking about running. What they saw was a governor who was very impressive, who had a depth and breadth of support across his state that maybe never has been seen before. He's built an unbelievable number of coalitions, not just as governor, but he's been doing that across this state for, better part of 20 years. And I think when folks looked at the race early on, they said, the governor's doing great. Indiana is on the right track, and we're going to stick with the governor.
The governor has received some pushback actually from the right, from people who are frustrated with his handling of the pandemic, the mask mandate, the early decisions to shut down or restrict some businesses. Are you concerned at all about any fracture within the Republican Party?
I mean, we are Republicans, and we always have some of our internal skirmishes. That's to be expected. We actually see the third-party candidate polling votes from both parties. And so there's certainly going to be folks, when you have something like a pandemic and you've got a governor who has to lead, and the Hoosiers have got to see that every day or every week throughout this pandemic. They've seen him, they've seen his team, they've seen how he's made decisions. He's been very transparent with it. But you can't make the number of tough decisions that the governor's had to make to steer Indiana through this pandemic without having some people who are unhappy. And let's face it, we're all tired. We're all tired of restrictions. We're all tired of masks. We're all tired of some of the things that have come along with COVID. We're looking forward to the day that we have a therapeutic or a vaccine and we can move forward completely. But until then, we've got to be smart and safe. And again, part of doing the right thing and making tough decisions is you're always going to have a few people who are put off by some of them, and they're expressing their opinions, and we'll see what the results are on Election Day. But I think by and large, a vast number of Hoosiers think that the governor has made science-based, data-driven decisions throughout this pandemic and done what's best for Hoosiers, and evidenced by how we're getting back on track. When you look at businesses who were really, for the most part, very limited amount of shutdown, tax collections are up, unemployment is ticking down to almost 6%. Still have a lot of room to go on that to get back where we were pre-pandemic, but we are definitely on the right track.
So much of the attention this year obviously has been in the 5th district, where Hamilton County is a big part of the 5th district. I think there are 8 counties, but Hamilton County is one of the obviously most populous. And some shifting demographics maybe in Hamilton County, a little more diversity, has led Democrats to believe they have a real shot of picking up that seat. And I mean, I have to say that the proliferation of ads on both sides just shows what a toss-up a lot of people think that race is. What are your thoughts about how Victoria Spartz is doing in the 5th district and what her chances are?
Well, you know, it's really a 3-part district. So in addition to Hamilton County being a third roughly, you know, Northern Marion County is also a third. And then the remaining 6 counties make up the other third. Victoria's having a hard-fought race. You know, one thing that is for certain is that in these federal races, money matters. And if you spend enough money in these races, you can make some of them that really are not on a baseline competitive, more competitive. And so I think this is going to be a competitive race down the stretch. I think Victoria is striking the right tone in messaging. Her campaign, along with the state party, the governor's apparatus, and really all of the in-holding House and Senate districts are all out working very hard to turn out the vote. And that's going to be critical in a race that is this tight, is who can get their voters out to vote on Election Day.
How do you think the 5th district race is impacting the legislative races that are within it or that overlap it?
It's hard to tell. You know, when you start looking at those in-holding races, it's really difficult to kind of parse out what is driving various aspects of the electorate in those races. I think generally by the time we get to Election Day and folks have had a chance to go out and campaign, knock on doors like they're doing every day, their own campaign mail and advertisements, I think by the time we get to Election Day, it'll have a limited impact because voters will by then have a good understanding who their own candidates are and what these races are all about. But it's certainly, you know, it is certainly hard to get away from that over-the-top advertising. For me, I have unplugged, so I don't see any of it. I'm just a Netflix type of person now, so I'm not seeing it every day, but I know from talking to others that it's a pretty constant barrage of advertising.
How do you think the presidential race is going to play out here in Indiana?
Oh, we're solidly Republican, Lesley. I mean, we've seen no polling that indicates there's any risk that the president isn't successful. Obviously, the vice president, Mike Pence, is from Indiana, so he helps that ticket as well in his home state. And so we just haven't seen much movement in numbers, and neither campaign is campaigning here. So I think that shows you that this is a state that's going to go solidly Republican on Election Day for the president.
So some of those, we were talking about the districts that overlap with the 5th districts, and some of those Republicans actually told IBJ in a story that was in the paper last week that they are struggling a little bit because of some frustration about Trump, that they have to remind people that they are not in federal government, that they are in state government, that they are not associated with Trump and directly associated with Trump. Are you surprised at all that that's causing a problem for some of the Republican lawmakers?
I've not seen that story or really heard that from them. I could see maybe some of them saying that. I've not been out on doors to hear what they're hearing from voters. I think one thing that you're certainly seeing, not just here, but across the country, is certainly a higher level of polarization. And so certainly the people who are on one side of the other of the presidential race are probably going to be vocal about it. So I can see when you knock on a door, you may have to talk about that issue and talk about where you are. So it's a polarizing environment out there, and I'm sure that folks who are out there campaigning are seeing some of that.
So the Attorney General's race is another interesting one here in Indiana. Delegates to the GOP convention opted not to renominate Curtis Hill, who has been somewhat embattled, of course, since he won 4 years ago. Instead, Republicans picked Congressman Todd Rokita, and Democrats are running Jonathan Weinzapfel. How do you think that race is shaping up? How is Todd Rokita doing?
I think he's doing well. I mean, I really think, that day of the convention probably sealed that race. I mean, once you put Todd Rokita in that race, the Attorney General race becomes just a baseline Republican-Democrat race. It's hard for really statewide candidates other than the governor to build up a substantial name ID. But Todd Rokita has one. He has one from being Secretary of State as well as a member of Congress. He's out campaigning very hard. And so I think you'll see that race be a solid Republican win on election night based on the candidates that are in it.
Kyle, finally, in a period of national discussion about race and inclusion, what is the Indiana Republican doing to try to expand its base, or is that a priority?
It's a huge priority. It's something I've been working on for almost 4 years. And we've made great progress even before sort of the unfortunate incidents with George Floyd and the social unrest of the summer. We last December hired our first director of diversity and inclusion here at the state party, really with a twofold mission. One is to help us go out and build personal relationships in the Black community and other minority communities across the state, which we've been doing a lot of. And the second is we have started, we're actually basically just finishing up the interviews, but we started about a year ago the implementation of a diversity program for the Indiana Republican Party, modeled a little bit after the successful Lugar series, where it's a firm belief of mine that if we're going to be able to get minorities to have a better sense of connection with the Republican Party, they're going to have to see more people that look like them in elected positions. And so this is going to be a program where we have representation from around the state, from various communities of color, and put them through a leadership series where they have the ability to interact with leaders of the party, learn about the party. And then we're very confident that over time, we're going to help build up a bench where you see more minorities elected as Republicans, more minorities in positions of significance within the administration of Republicans, and also on the campaign side. So we're really excited about it. And that's just on the party side. That's not even getting into all the efforts that the governor's making on his side, which are substantial as well.
Kyle, thanks so much for chatting about all this. We appreciate it, and good luck in these next 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm pleased to be joined by John Zody, the chairman of the Indiana Democratic Party, to chat about the upcoming election, or what really is the ongoing election. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you, Lesley. Thanks.
So people are voting already, and the election day is just 2 weeks away. What is the message you want Democratic candidates to be getting out to voters at this moment?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing we would say with 2 weeks to go and early voting underway is that the process of voting is in fact underway, and there are ways up until this Thursday, you can request your absentee ballot online. I know candidates are out talking about that. You can early vote in your county. And then of course, if you're planning on voting November 3rd, it's to make a plan to vote. So I think candidates are out there working the phones, working the texts, and telling voters to make sure that they make a plan to vote, in whatever way they're going to do that. But also, it's talking about issues like public education, issues like healthcare, talking about as you talk about healthcare, the health and safety of our citizens as we're in this pandemic right now.
So, John, was part of the Democrats' strategy this year to try to get more voters to get out early?
It was, as you know, in the primary, we had no-fault absentee balloting for mail-in voting. We pushed very hard to get that this time. Unfortunately, Republicans didn't want to do it. I think it was an act of voter suppression, quite frankly, why they didn't do that, because we are in stage 5 and cases are higher than they have been. And so I think that if we had done no fault absentee excuse, we would have gotten more people voting. But yes, we were working very hard to get people to vote by mail. We, as we often do, sent out absentee ballot applications. We encourage people to request them online. We've had a whole digital campaign on encouraging people to vote by mail and then vote early when the time comes if they're not comfortable voting on November 3rd.
So much of the attention this year has been about the 5th congressional district. That's a district that's been held by Republicans for a long time. I know Democrats feel like they might be able to flip it. What do you think has changed that makes the Democratic candidate viable this year?
Well, the battleground is shifting in Indiana, Lesley. I know when you and I first started working together, we had battlegrounds in other parts of the state. And now we are seeing battlegrounds shifting to our suburbs. We're seeing that across the country, quite frankly. And so that is no different here in Indiana. We have evidence, the numbers are there, not just the anecdotes. And so over the years, we've seen the precincts and the votes trend toward more Democratic votes. In the 2016 election, the 2018 election, and then in 2019, we elected Democratic members of town and city councils in the 5th district, and then even around in Avon. So we have a Democratic mayor in Zionsville, Democratic councilor in Carmel, 2 Democratic councilors in Fishers. And so we see the numbers trending, and we see those votes backing up the fact that Democrats have been elected. Now we're seeing this district in the congressional race with Christina Hale running as a top target nationally. She has run a wonderful campaign. She's a great candidate. And that's bolstered by the fact that those numbers are in fact changing as the populations in places like Hamilton and Boone County grow and become more Democratic.
You mentioned that there have been a lot of outside interest in this race, lots of money coming in from both sides. How does that change how the race plays out?
Well, I think you certainly have the influence of outside groups coming in, but I don't think it changes the message of the candidates. Christina Hale is talking a lot about healthcare. Her opponent has sort of done a 180 on healthcare, where she talked about the fact in a competitive Republican primary that she would work to overturn and repeal the ACA. And now she's sort of backed off that. Christina Hale's consistently talked about the need to protect people with pre-existing conditions. She's been someone who has been without healthcare in her life and understands very well the struggles that people go through when they don't have access to affordable healthcare. She's been a very consistent messenger on that. And so whatever the outside groups come in and do, whether they're bolstering a message or opposing it, I think you have to look back at the candidates and see that they are showing their true colors here. Christina, in that she is fighting consistently for people with pre-existing conditions. She did that in the state house. She'll continue to do it in Congress.
Christina Hale has actually outraised Victoria Spartz in several quarters. To what do you attribute that success?
I think it's a couple of things. I think it's those trending numbers. We've got great legislative candidates running up in that district along with Christina. There's energy behind those folks. I think you see that people are looking at the suburbs and they're looking at the candidates. And you can't overlook Christina's experience and her drive. She won her first legislative race by 51 votes in that area, and she has continued to build that into a time where she now is a top target. I've known Christina a long time. She is a relentless worker. And so I think people are inspired by her story and inspired by her message.
You mentioned the legislative races that overlap or are contained in the 5th district. How do you think the tight battle in the 5th district could impact some of those legislative races?
Well, I'm a believer in rising tide lifting all boats. So I think that you see races up and down the ballot and you see the incumbent Speaker of the House working. You see Jerry Torr, I think he was quoted saying he's never had to work this hard. You've got great candidates running against both Speaker Houston and Jerry Torr and Amy Rivera Cole and Ashley Klein. You've got Naomi Bechtold running against Donna Scheibele and Pam Deckert running for Speaker Bosma's open seat. And so you have those candidates who have been on the ground. Some of them are running again, which helps build name ID. And so you see those folks running great campaigns. Christina's running a great campaign. And so those tides are going to impact each other, I think, in very positive ways. And people are really excited to see The local Democratic parties in the 5th district, of course, in Marion County as well, are strong and growing. And you see that energy with new people getting involved. And I think it's just good all around. You're seeing that energy all across the board up there.
Now, 4 years ago, Donald Trump won Indiana with a big margin and won in the 5th district with a big margin. Do you expect that will be different this year?
I do. I think that the 5th district, I'll point out, was the place where Hillary Clinton finished closest. So she did the best there of any district that she didn't win. She did the best in the 5th district. Senator Donnelly won the 5th district in 2018 in his campaign. So you're seeing numbers continue to trend there. And so I expect to see a good finish for Joe Biden in the 5th. While the president could win the state, we'll see how things go in the 5th. And I don't think the president wins the state by 19 points again.
Do you have any predictions by how much you think Trump might win Indiana this year?
No, I think it's still a little bit all over the map, Lesley. I'm a bad predictor on margins. Even after this long in politics, I just don't do it. And so I think people are kind of seeing through the president's rhetoric. I think people are concerned about their relatives and loved ones, including those that they've lost during this pandemic. And they've seen an irresponsible reaction by the Trump-Pence administration. We can't forget that he's running on the ticket with Mike Pence, and who has been the leader of this disastrous response to the coronavirus. And quite frankly, the president's been mocking it. I think Hoosiers are starting to see through that, and that'll come out on Election Day.
The Attorney General's race is another interesting one. I think when Jonathan Weidenbener, the Democratic nominee, got into the race, he expected to be facing Curtis Hill, who, of course, has had a number of problems. Instead, the Republicans nominated Todd Rokita, a former congressman. How do you think that race is going for Jonathan Weidenbener, and what does he need to do to be able to win this statewide race?
Well, I think the AG's race has been on the map for some time since Curtis Hill really was elected. He started out by asking for a raise and redecorating his office. And although he's not the candidate right now, Todd Rokita has a record. Jonathan Weidenbener has a record of service as a state representative and the mayor of Evansville and a chancellor at Ivy Tech Community College. He has outraised Todd Rokita, even more so Rokita's sort of bailout from the Republican attorneys general association, but Jonathan has outraised him. He's talking about healthcare. A couple of numbers just to share with you and those watching. 2.7 million Hoosiers have a pre-existing condition. 500,000 Hoosiers or so get their healthcare through HIP 2.0. Todd Rokita voted 54 times to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and has tripled down on his rhetoric that he would keep us in the lawsuit that is going before the Supreme Court in just a few weeks here. Jonathan Weidenbener said he would get us out of that lawsuit on day one. It endangers people's health care. It endangers their lives. It's ridiculous. It's costing taxpayers money because of ideology. Jonathan's on the right path here to win. This is a top targeted race for Attorney General in the United States. And so we look for him to keep running strong, to get that message out. That's what you have to do on TV and elsewhere. And I think Jonathan's doing it.
We've talked about several competitive races, and we're just now getting to the governor's race. Mm-hmm. It seemed like Woody Myers really would be able to put up an interesting campaign in trying to unseat Eric Holcomb, but it doesn't feel like that has come together. What do you think has been the trouble with Woody Myers trying to gain some traction in this election?
Sure. Well, I think he's certainly, I think he would say himself that it's been a struggle to raise money, which makes it harder to get your message out. But I think he's done creative things. Also during a pandemic, trying to get your name out there for a statewide race is tough, and raise the kind of money you need to raise against an incumbent governor, which is always hard in Indiana. But I think you pointed to the fact that Dr. Myers is a very dynamic and accomplished candidate with his medical service, both to the state and in the private sector, as well as in the hospital emergency room. And so you've got somebody here who has had their message has been consistent. They have within that ticket with Woody Myers and former state representative Linda Lawson, two people who both know the state house, they know the state, and they know the pandemic we're in and how they would address it. Yeah, the campaign's been tough, but I think you have seen them, as I said, come up with creative ways to get the message out. A lot of it being done on Zoom. They've been getting around the state as much as they can in a safely, socially distanced way. But I think people continue to look at Dr. Myers as somebody who really has the professional qualifications right now to be our state's governor, and I hope that people will see that as we go into Election Day. But sure, it's been tough to move that race, move the needle in that race, which I think is tough anytime you're running against an incumbent. I will say that people shouldn't overlook the response of the Holcomb administration here and the impact that things are having on the economy, where our GDP is down 33%. I think there are still a couple 100,000 Hoosiers looking for work, and our cases for COVID, as I mentioned earlier, are higher than they've ever been. And so I'm not sure that people should point to the Holcomb administration as a gold star response for this.
Are you concerned at all that Dr. Myers' inability to get traction will hurt any of these other races that you're trying to win, any of the legislative races or the Attorney General or the 5th District?
Well, I think we are looking at those candidates up and down the ballot. You always look at the top of the ticket. I think Vice President Biden is running strong. I think Dr. Myers is running strong in certain ways and in certain areas. And so we look to sort of have that as a team. I mentioned tides lift boats. I think you also have to look at the fact that there are different tides. And so where Dr. Myers is running strong and where Jonathan Weinzapfel will run strong, we're going to look at all those races up and down the ballot. And I think really, as you get further down that ballot, we've got really strong legislative candidates running. We've got a plan to get out the vote and reach out to as many voters as possible by November 3rd.
And we're coming up on the first gubernatorial debate. Would you like to see Dr. Myers do in that debate to make some impact?
I think be consistent, which I think he will be. He is a physician, and one thing I always respect about physicians is their ability to be calm and sort of tell people in a very concise and clear and calm way what they think needs to be done in any situation. And in this case, it's what he would do to lead our state. And I have full confidence that he'll do that.
Great. Well, John, thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Lesley, it's good to see you again. And hello to all those watching at the HobNob.
Stay tuned and you will get to see a panel discuss that gubernatorial debate. All you need to do is go into your Attendify app and click on the next panel discussion. Thanks a lot.